Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we gotta talk about the mainstream media, online media meltdowns related to Kamala Harris's decisive defeat in the 2024 election. Because we all know that when you have $1 billion, a 3-to-1 money advantage, when you run about 10 points under your major issue, which is the issue of abortion, when you fail in every regard in terms of your campaign, actually suggest that people should turn the page when you're the person in power. Obviously, it's the voters' fault. It's those no good Latinos' fault. It's those no good white women's fault. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The mainstream left-wing media attacking everyone and anyone. And by the way, the online media is doing this as well because they cannot accept that they ran a horrible candidate who ran a horrible campaign. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money, okay?
I think if you look at the New York Times this morning, the headline was America makes a perilous choice. I think that in 2016, we didn't know what we would get from a Trump administration, but we know now. And we know now that he will have almost unfettered power. And so I worry.
So one of the things that I absolutely love about this statement from Sunny Hostin is that it's actually true, but not in the way that she thinks it is, because she's saying, oh, in 2016, we didn't know. Now, by the way, if you rewind to 2016, she was calling everybody an evil white racist for daring to vote for Trump back then. But now we do know. We do know what Trump will do. And the thing is, this actually works against the Democrats because we had a Trump term and most people reported better economic outcomes during that previous Trump administration. So ironically, Sunny Hostin is telling the truth right here, even though her estimation of what went down during the first Trump term is wildly different from what you guys out there in the audience believe went down, and of course, the reality of what went down. So she's already upset, she's already angry, she's very, very sad because how dare you not vote for Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris was entitled to the presidency. I mean, they installed her as the head of the ticket without getting a single vote in the Democratic primary, and it was your job to fall in line, obey her, and vote for her because she is partially black.
And so I worry, not about myself, actually. I don't worry about my station in life. I worry about the working class. I worry about my mother, a retired teacher. I worry about our elderly and their Social Security and their Medicare. I worry about my children's future, especially my daughter, who now has less rights than I have. And I remember my father telling me many, many years ago that I was the first person in his family to enjoy full civil rights. And now I have less civil rights than I had when he told me that.
So one of the things that I absolutely find hilarious about this is that Sunny Hostin saying she's worried about her daughter who has less rights than her. She's worried about the working class, but she's not worried enough about the working class to ever talk to them, to ever find out the issues that motivate them. Of course, she just assumes that they're a bunch of racist, sexist bigots.
So again, I'm profoundly disturbed that the 14th Amendment of the Constitution did not prevent someone who participated in an insurrection from becoming president of the United States. I think that going forward, the convicted felon box on employment applications better be taken off, because if you can be the president of the United States, then you should not be prevented from employment in this country, because I remember applying for my jobs as a federal prosecutor, and there was a box for convicted felons. And so that box better be taken off.
So here comes the virtue signals. She talks about how, oh, you have to take the convicted felon box off the job applications, because if you could be a convicted felon and be president of the United States, then you should not be able to have that box to discriminate against anybody who commits crimes whenever they apply for a job. Now, I will just point out that when you ban the box, which is the movement that happens across the country, what ultimately ends up happening is that black people get hired less often, not more often, because this was a good way to distinguish among the higher criminal population that exists, specifically among black males, who was a criminal and not a criminal. So of course, she's advocating for a policy that ends up hurting law-abiding black citizens in her virtue signal. But secondly, Trump's felony convictions, the stupid business crimes that Alvin Bragg, for political reasons, brought against him and upgraded to felonies, again, for political reasons, chances are that they might be dismissed. They might be thrown out once he goes back to court in New York, because what ends up happening is even though you get convicted by the jury, you're not actually technically considered a felon until you're sentenced. So if at sentencing they toss those convictions, guess what? Even this phony attack against the evil orange man will be kaput. It will be gone.
I'm worried about mass deportation and internment camps, and I'm also worried about Elon Musk warning Americans to prepare for temporary hardship.
So she ends up wrapping up by saying that she's worried about mass deportations. Again, illegal immigrants first in these people's minds. They don't realize that one of the major reasons that they lost the election, one of the major reasons that they lost so much ground with Latinos, is that they kept offering Latinos open borders, despite the fact that Latinos said time and time again, immigration is not their number one issue. The economy is their number one issue, and they would either talk about the economy or inflation as their top two consistently. Yet liberal elites like Sunny Hostin would say over and over and over again, here's some open borders. Also, your language is dirty and filthy and disgusting, so we're going to call you, instead of Latinos, Latin X. So is anybody surprised that when Republicans take the time and make the effort to reach out to these voters, that they actually gain ground with these voters? Well, although nobody should be surprised, obviously the woke left is surprised by this.
I'm surprised at the result, but I'm not surprised. As a woman of color, I was so hopeful that a mixed race woman married to a Jewish guy could be elected president of this country. And I think that it had nothing to do with policy. I think this was a referendum of cultural resentment in this country.
Well, I think it,
So that gets a big hand from the crowd. She says it has nothing to do with policy. It was all about cultural resentment. Yet time and time again, what we find out is that it had everything to do with policy. Again, Trump didn't just gain ground in some counties, in some swing states to barely win. He is on track to win the popular vote. He gained ground almost everywhere. In fact, the only demographic that it appears that he lost ground on was wealthy people, people who make over $100,000 a year. One of the biggest winner counties or winner areas for Kamala Harris was the District of Columbia, which is one of the more wealthy places in the entire country. So this is exactly what we were telling you was going to happen during the course of this election. People kept mentioning that you're totally out of touch. And again, you ran a horrible candidate that told people to turn the page when she was the person in office. So yeah, cultural resentment, oh, evil white racism, we get it. We all understand that's where you're coming from. And this is why you'll never fix the problem. In fact, there are people going out there saying that Kamala Harris ran a perfect campaign.
And I think it's important to say that, you know, anyone who has experienced or been in the United States for any period of time and experienced this country's history and knows it cannot have believed that it would be easy to elect a woman president, let alone a woman of color. Let's just be clear. And nothing that was true yesterday about how flawlessly this campaign was run is not true now. I mean, this really was an historic, flawlessly run campaign. She had Queen Latifah never endorses anyone. She came out and endorsed. You know, I mean, she had every prominent celebrity voice. She had the Taylor Swift. She had the Swifties. She had the Beehive. Like, you could not have run a better campaign in that short period of time. And I think that's still true.
And the metric that they use to say that she ran a perfect campaign is that she raised over $1 billion in a very short amount of time. But the thing is, money is a tool. What you do with that money is what actually matters. And again, as I said in the open, she had a 3-to-1 money advantage over Donald Trump, over the evil orange man. She ended up $20 million in debt in terms of her campaign because she squandered all of that money. She was embarrassing throughout the whole course of this campaign. The only time that she was rising in the polls was in that first 6 weeks when she refused to do any interviews, refused to tell anybody anything about policy. And the reason why, if you look at the generic Democrat polling versus Donald Trump, is because people saw her as a generic Democrat because she wasn't saying anything about policy. After the convention, she did nothing but drop in the polls. And out of desperation, when she was already crashing in terms of her campaign, she decided to try to reach out to Republicans. But then she did that in the worst way possible by trying to reach out to the Cheneys and other neoconservatives that people have fallen out of favor with in the entire country. And by the way, the result of that, she actually got less registered Republicans voting for her than did Joe Biden. Absolutely a disaster from top to bottom for Kamala Harris. And again, the issues were economic based. Now, we're going to throw it over to the majority report because this clip is absolutely hilarious and I want to play it for you.
One thing I'll just get a little emotional about is it does, as a woman, feel pretty I feel like the humanity of women and their rights, no one cares. And even in the face of Trump and everything that he represented, that's a tough pill to swallow.
So to say that Emma Vigeland is melting down is the understatement of the century. She actually put out a tweet slamming the white women and saying, oh, I can't believe I expected them to be good enough people to not vote for the evil orange man, and she's one of the good ones and all that. Quote, can't believe I actually had faith in other white women to choose our collective reproductive rights over their own whiteness. Naive and dumb. Now, I do agree with the naive and dumb part, but not because of what you said overall in this tweet. But the tears right here are well deserved for her, and this is for a number of reasons, because normally I would try not to laugh at somebody who is crying, but the thing is, Emma Vigeland doesn't have those standards. You remember Sarah Comrie? She was a pregnant 36-year-old physician's assistant who just got off her shift at work. She ended up renting an e-bike so she could make it to her home in Brooklyn. However, even though she legitimately rented the e-bike, what ultimately ended up happening on video was that 5 black youths ended up forcing the bike back into the dock, taking it from her, filming her, and then painting her as an evil white racist. And guess who ended up mocking her for crying in this situation?
I mean, I ride city bikes, which is clearly what they're using there, and it's not that hard to figure out. If you're doing it on the app, it'll say which bike and which. It'll have a label at the docking station for which bike she's in reference, or they're both referencing. So honestly, it should have been pretty clear to her, but. She's in work clothes, so yeah. My first thought was, is she drunk? Like, is she? I don't know, but she just seemed really out of it, and she's straight up racist, totally. But there was like, she wasn't really making a ton of sense, which was bizarre. And they were like, "This is my bike. Just go to the other bike." Stand, the little docking station, and get your own. It's not that difficult. But
now I've done multiple videos on this, and we actually have receipts that back up Sarah Comrie's version of events that totally prove that these guys were scamming the e-bike system. And in fact, you can see on the video them force her into the dock, and yet Emma Vigeland out of nowhere just said that this was some racist conspiracy by this evil white racist 36-year-old pregnant physician's assistant to steal a bike from 5 black youths. Again, when in the history of ever has a 36-year-old pregnant white woman walked up to 5 black teenagers and stolen their bike? It's never happened, not at all, in no way, shape, or form. And Emma Vigeland decided to mock her for being emotional in this situation like this.
But yeah, I mean, the white woman fake crying thing, I could do it too, but and then you just turn it off.
So when I see Emma crying about how she didn't get the outcome in her election, how the candidate that stole the nomination, threw out 14 million primary votes, ran a horrible campaign, ultimately ended up losing, all I have to say to you is shut up. Stop crying, grow up, and honestly, if you do want to cry, don't do it on air in such an embarrassing way. Go to your frozen yogurt / bookstore in Brooklyn and cry amongst your loser Antifa friends. This spoiled brat is this upset about an election, crying about it on air. Meanwhile, when actual everyday people, actually pregnant women, by the way, who have to deal with the consequences of being pregnant in today's United States of America, are being harassed by 5 black teenagers, she assumes in her brain that that's the villain because she's white.
One thing I'll just get a little emotional about is it does, as a woman, feel pretty I feel like the humanity of women and their rights.
But yeah, I mean, the white woman fake crying thing, I could do it too, but and then you just turn it off.
No one cares. And even in the face of Trump and everything that he represented. That's a tough pill to swallow.
When it came down to having a regular working person having a negative interaction, which, by the way, she was 100% in the right and those kids were 100% in the wrong in, she decided to jump on her, attack her. And by the way, the left wing was pushing for this woman to be fired while she's visibly pregnant based on the scenario that they concocted in their head that had no connection with reality. So again, shut up.
What do you think pushed that, especially with the Hispanic voters going for Donald Trump as much as they did? Because that made a big difference.
I think that a lot of it was he was able to sell a lot of Hispanic voters that immigration was a threat to them, that some of the people coming across the border was a threat to them. I think that we've got to be honest, among Hispanic men and black men, there's a lot of misogyny. And I think that we've got to deal with the reality that he appealed to this whole false macho thing that some black men and some Latino men went for.
And then, of course, we have on Joe Scarborough, Al Sharpton, one of the worst people in American politics, following suit, saying that the reason why Trump made gains among blacks and Latino voters is because of the misogyny, because of the racism, because of this false macho attitude, and the false perception that illegal immigration hurts them. The thing is, Al Sharpton, the thing is, left-wing media, illegal immigration does hurt them. We've seen these black voters in cities like Chicago, in Denver, in New York City, complain over and over and over again about resources for them being cut in order to benefit the migrants. They've been telling you that they don't like this, that they're against this, yet you didn't listen. In fact, you removed Joe Biden from office, who, by the way, called for these people to surge to the border. Let's play that clip again.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
And installed Kamala Harris, the border czar, the person that Joe Biden put in charge of this problem, that allowed these people to flood into this nation, as the candidate. And then she ended up saying, well, listen, I know we didn't do anything for 3.5 years about this problem, but we had a so-called compromise bill that let in, by the way, almost 2 million illegal immigrants every year. They just legalized them, thus making the problem worse. And the Republicans, and specifically Donald Trump, the evil orange man, he ended up quashing that. Yeah, these people didn't believe that Kamala Harris was going to do anything about immigration because she wasn't doing anything about immigration. She was denying it as a problem. And again, I said this to everybody out there in the audience when I was worried about her potentially winning, that this would be taken as a mandate to the Democratic Party, that they could ignore the immigration issue for 3.5 years, let all these people flood into our country over and over again, maximize all the city resources that they want while you're getting cuts, because if they just pretend to care about it a couple of months before the election, the electorate will fall for that. Well, guess what? I'm happy to report that that is not the case. But of course, it's always the voters, it's always the sexism, it's always the misogyny. It can't be that Kamala Harris was totally out of touch with reality, and every time they asked her a question about something substantive, she would talk about how she grew up in a middle-class household and how they cared about their lawns.
I grew up a middle-class kid. My mother raised my sister and me. She worked very hard. She was able to finally save up enough money to buy our first house when I was a teenager. I grew up in a community of hardworking people, you know, construction workers and nurses and teachers. And I try to explain to some people who may not have had the same experience, you know, but a lot of people will relate to this. You know, I grew up in a neighborhood of folks who were very proud of their lawn.
And you should relate to the fact that they cared about their lawns in the neighborhood that she grew up in, which, by the way, was a middle-class household, middle-class household.
They didn't want to confront the past issues on the border. It took them too long to confront that. We talked about a transgender inmate ad that ran 30,000 times that the Democrats refused to respond to.
So the funny thing about this is that Scarborough is melting down. He ends up bringing Al Sharpton on. He agrees with him about the misogyny and the racism and the sexism and the evil white racism among blacks and Latinos in the United States of America. But then after Sharpton gets off this segment, he starts talking about some of the actual problems that Kamala had, including the 2 ads about transgender inmates that Trump ran that Kamala's only response to was to bitch about because they were so effective.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
It's hard to believe, but it's true. Even the liberal media was shocked Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners and illegal aliens.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
He murdered a father of 3, sentenced to life in prison. Kamala Harris pushed to use tax dollars to pay for his sex change.
I made sure that they changed the policy so that every transgender inmate would have access.
It sounds insane because it is insane. Kamala was the first to help pay for a prisoner's sex change.
The power that I had, I used it in a way that was about pushing for the movement, frankly, and the agenda.
Kamala's agenda is they, them, not you.
I'm Donald J. Trump, and I approve this message.
Look, these two ads absolutely were devastating. That's why the Democrats have complained about them so much. And what's great about this is that they complain about Trump distracting from the issues because they can't complain about the inaccuracy of the ads. And Kamala Harris had no response except to complain about it, whine about it, say it was not fair that Trump could actually play things that she actually said and show what she actually supported. And then they tried to pretend that Trump wasn't supportive of this policy because somewhere in the federal government they had this policy while he was president, even though there were no cases while he was president. Then he ends up dropping the second ad, which shows that while she was AG of California, this was a priority for her. She ended up doing this for a murderer, and that's exactly the kind of liberal idiocy, progressive idiocy, that really hurt her campaign. And it's funny because people will say, oh, Kamala ran away from the woke during her election, which is true. She tried to do the Obama, I'm above racial politics and all that stuff throughout her campaign. But the thing is, we knew who she was from before. The only reason she was on the ticket in the first place was because of the Black Lives Matter riots. By the way, we got to talk about candidates and ballot initiatives related to the BLM effect that completely got killed this election night. And the only reason they didn't choose a better candidate than her is because they thought it would be racist and sexist to pass over the black woman vice president. Again, I know people are going to say she's only a quarter black, but relax, for the purpose of this conversation, it doesn't matter, in order to benefit a white man like Gavin Newsom or whoever they were going to install.
Yes. But I do have an indictment of some of the strategy. And again, the people that said Joe Biden was the problem. Where's my camera?
He was not the solution. He was not the solution.
I will just note that it is probably not the best idea that Democrats orchestrated a very public stab fest, a proverbial stabbing in the front of the sitting president of the United States of America, and then didn't use him in his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania. I will defer to Mr. Lemire.
Now, with that being said, my absolute favorite clip of all the clips is Simone Sanders, who is a Biden surrogate, coming out and talking about Joe Biden, talking about how the Harris team and the Democrats were stabbing Joe Biden in the chest, even though they stabbed him in the back, and her saying that that was not fair to him. And this is what I'm really in for, the beginning of the ripping of Biden's team and Harris's team apart by one another, because Biden, of course, is still angry about that coup, make no mistake about it. But of course, I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. Did you expect the Democrats to learn any valid lessons from this election? Or like me, did you expect them to find that challenge impossible? Again, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the Democrats going into full denial mode. Till next time.